Good evening from New York. I'm Dan Rather with news, analysis, and commentary. First, about guns. The company that made the rifle used in the Parkland school shooting has now answered some of the questions submitted by its largest investor, the BlackRock hedge fund. As we told you last week, BlackRock is asking every gun maker it invests in for details about what they're doing to reduce criminal use of their products. I want to share some of the response they got from American Outdoor Brands, which owns Smith & Wesson, which made the M&P 15 rifle that killed 17 people on Valentine's Day. You may recall that the CEO, one Mr. James Debney, has been honored by the National Rifle Association for topping $1 million in donations. The NRA, of course, serves as the public face for gun companies that don't want to be seen pushing back against laws that might threaten their sales. You should also know that BlackRock is American Outdoor Brands' biggest investor, owning 11% of the company. In his letter to BlackRock last week, Debney said his company will consider, quote, reasonable proposals with an open mind. However, he said, and I quote, the solution is not to make a politically motivated action that has an adverse impact on our company, but results in no increase in public safety. That's a direct quote. He went on to say that we must collectively have the courage to ensure that our actions, quote, are guided by data. It was the NRA, which Mr. Debney supports, that helped kill federal collection and study of exactly that data. One of BlackRock's specific questions was about research and development of technology, such as trigger locks or smart guns, to reduce the odds of accidents or misuse. Here's Debney's response, quote, as far as whether we invest in R&D in this area, we do not. We are a manufacturing company, not a technology company, and we are poorly situated to hire those with the knowledge and expertise to develop such technology and to otherwise compete with technology companies who are far more knowledgeable in this area. In fact, to divert significant resources to these initiatives would be irresponsible when the most recent market research shows there's very little interest or desire among firearm consumers for smart gun products, even if they were available. End of his rather long quote. Very little interest in smart gun products? The fact is, polling shows some 60% of potential gun buyers would be interested in exactly that. As for whether American Outdoor Brands is really a manufacturing company, 4 days before that letter, on March 2nd, the company's own filing with the Securities and Exchange Commission said it is not a manufacturing company. In the section where it's asked to identify the kind of company it is, choosing not manufacturing but, quote, other. And whether they're capable of developing new products? Well, on March 1st, Debney held a conference call with Wall Street analysts. He assured them that the company is in good shape despite plummeting gun sales, thanks to their innovation and development of new products.
Developing new products, a large component of our organic growth strategy, is focused on continuous product innovation, and we are excited about the pipeline of new offerings in development, with a wide range of additional products planned for rollout in fiscal 2019.
The day after Debney's letter to BlackRock, Anthony Borges went into surgery. Anthony is 15 years old. On Valentine's Day, Debney's M&P 15 rifle sent 5 bullets into Anthony's body as he blocked a door at Marjorie Stoneham Douglas High School to help his classmates escape. The technology of that rifle creates a shock wave around the bullets, blowing apart tissue the bullets never even touch. One of those bullets sent a shock wave through Anthony's intestines. Doctors were worried that a resulting ulcer might lead to infection. Anthony is now back in a medically induced coma, back in intensive care, recovering from surgery and facing more if he's lucky. In his letter, Debney said the first course of action must involve mental health. On Friday, 3 days later, a combat veteran who was getting treatment shot and killed 3 mental health workers and then himself. Debney also said in his letter that his company supports enforcement of gun laws. Then on Friday, 3 days later, the NRA sued the state of Florida to stop its new law raising the age for gun purchases. One final note here. Smith & Wesson tried pursuing smart gun technology in the past. They stopped because of a massive boycott by some gun owners. A boycott just for attempting to make smart guns an option. As long as hardcore gun owners remain willing to boycott common sense measures like that, it may be time for the rest of us to boycott hardcore gun owners. Now to Congress. In 1982, a bipartisan majority in Congress, passed what was called the Depository Institutions Act, deregulating savings and loans companies. 4 years later, the savings and loan crisis began. More than 1,000 S&Ls disappeared. Before it was over, taxpayers would spend $132 billion to bail out the savings and loan industry. In 1999, a bipartisan majority in Congress blew up the firewall between lending banks and investment banks. Congress then passed another bill making it easier to gamble on derivatives. 8 years later, the mortgage crisis began. Dozens of financial institutions went under, almost taking the U.S. automobile industry with them. Taxpayers spent $700 billion on bank bailouts. In 2018, this week to be specific, a bipartisan majority stands poised to pass the Senate's Economic Growth, Regulatory Relief, and Consumer Protection Act, as it's called. As we reported to you last week, that bill, also known as the Crapo bill, for Republican sponsor Mike Crapo, will lift some restrictions on smaller banks, but it will also liberate larger banks with up to $250 billion in assets from those restrictions. 17 senators in the Democratic caucus voted last week to advance the bill. 7 of them own stock in banks and other financial firms that stand to benefit from the bill, according to a new report by Alice Koch of the Young Turks. One senator, Clara McCaskill of Missouri, with her husband, owns more than $1 million in Warren Buffett's company, Berkshire Hathaway. As the Young Turks reported, Berkshire Hathaway owns a mobile home company that would now be allowed to steer buyers to lending companies also owned by Berkshire Hathaway. You should also know that some banks will no longer have to report some data on their borrowers. That means the data that reveal patterns of discriminatory lending will now be incomplete, which in turn means even banks that do report such data will be harder to prosecute because the overall patterns will be tougher to prove. This comes at a time when the agency that's supposed to enforce against racial discrimination on mortgages, automobile loans, and other lendings, well, it doesn't. And to cap things off, we learned last week that the Department of Housing and Urban Development is considering changing its mission statement to drop freedom from housing discrimination and replace that with, quote, opportunities to achieve self-sufficiency. That's the context in which the Senate this week takes up the Crapo bill. Ironically, the members of Congress most likely to kill it are Republicans who think it should help banks more. If those Republicans finally refuse to back it, they'll put Democrats in position to say something about this bill. At that point, if it happens, it'll be in the hands of Democratic leadership, two of whom, Senator Chuck Schumer and Congressman Steny Hoyer, were in Congress back when the old Depository Institutions Act passed. At the time, they were co-sponsors. This time, we'll be watching. The Trump cabinet's crazy spending. The takeaway isn't what you may think. I'll explain right after this.
Hey, Dave. As you can probably see, Skype froze.
Yes.
Frozen crashed.
You know, I'm watching that documentary on the Vietnam War, and there was a TV journalist in the middle of some tiny little village in Vietnam doing live TV as the soldiers were burning the Vietnamese huts, and it didn't crash. And that was
That's a good point.
1965, and he was in Vietnam.
Look, we're doing interviews over there at youtube.com/TYT interviews, and we've done some amazing ones recently.
So now, of course, you know the person most widely considered to be the most progressive senator is Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Why not back him during the 2016 primaries? Why be a Democrat at all? And we're in a time where you cannot, in good conscience, sit on the sidelines of history.
The White House called 4 cabinet secretaries in for a tongue lashing about their spending habits, among other embarrassments. That's according to a story from CNN. Called in were Ben Carson of Housing and Urban Development, Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke, David Shulkin at Veterans Affairs, and Scott Pruitt from the EPA. They were called in for luxury travel, exorbitant furniture, and a $139,000 door. It's important to hold government officials accountable for how they spend taxpayer dollars, and when the party in power claims to want small government, it's easy to call out hypocrisy. And there is some. But it's also important to resist the siren call of austerity, to remember the value of government spending. Government spending, after all, helps the economy. Government spending, in no small way, created the middle class, and it leads us out of recessions. Government spending is a powerful tool to normalize costs of things that should be expensive because the costs are worth it. Things like skilled labor, sustainable materials and methods, historic preservation, aesthetics, and beauty. These things are valuable and invaluable. But we are the richest nation in history. If we choose to use these resources, we have the resources for great things, such as what? Well, high-speed rail, walking on Mars, schools, housing, medical care. These things have infinite value to millions of us. And that value is not perishable. It extrapolates through the decades. And we applaud when billionaires wrap themselves in luxury. We think how cool it is when they send rockets into space. Well, we the people used to do that before we gave them our money. We used to use it not for amusement or self-aggrandizement, but for our mutual benefit. To admire private executives for those things, but deny them for us, our government and our executives, takes a sad sort of self-loathing. And maybe the problem isn't paying people $139,000 to make one door. Maybe the problem is paying people millions to run entire companies into the basement. We, as a nation, as a people, as a society, we have the resources for everyone to live at least reasonably well. When they tell you we don't, they're setting you up to tell you we can't teach anyone, house anyone, or treat anyone. Our government workers should have nice offices and travel at least fairly comfortably. We all should. If you're not convinced America has the money for big things, you should know about President Trump's military parade. As we told you last month, the parade was first floated as a way to show appreciation for active duty service members. We stated at the time that there was something grotesque about trying to throw a victory parade at the commander-in-chief's house while the men and women serving under him are still taking fire. Well, according to a new Pentagon memo, the parade in a shift will now actually be for veterans on Veterans Day. No one this week paid much attention to the flip from active duty to retired military. Another indication, most people still seem to think the parade is mostly for President Trump. And then there's the money. The White House itself estimates that the parade from the White House to the Capitol, complete with military flyovers, will cost as much as $30 million. President Trump wanted tanks too, but the Pentagon said no to that. Also, consider the timing. President Trump asked for the parade in January and got a yes in less than 2 months. Meanwhile, active duty military asked way back on June 7th for danger pay bonuses for serving in a handful of countries, including Niger, where 4 American servicemen were killed last year. The Trump administration approved that request last week. By the way, those troops will get an additional $225 every month, minus $50 from hazardous duty pay that they now lose because the Pentagon caps on combining such incentives. And no parade. Coming up next, the story you haven't heard about the devastation in the making in Puerto Rico. I see what we all see. The deep divisions, the endemic injustices, the uncertainty about our future. We have sometimes stumbled. We have sometimes fallen short. But we can renew our national purpose if we recognize that what unites us is far greater and stronger than all that divides us.
Look, we're doing interviews over there at youtube.com/TYT interviews, and we've done some amazing ones recently.
So now, of course, you know the person most widely considered to be the most progressive senator is Bernie Sanders. Yeah. Why not back him during the 2016 primaries? Why be a Democrat at all? And we're in the time where you cannot, in good conscience, sit on the sidelines of history.
The power is coming back in Puerto Rico, but it's also going away. Electrical power has now been restored to at least 89% of the people there. 6 months after 2 hurricanes sent Puerto Rico spiraling into the darkness of America's biggest blackout ever, however, Puerto Rico's political power is fainter than ever. Last week, legislators there advanced a bill opening the door to future rate hikes on that electrical power 11% of the island still doesn't have. Keep in mind, before the storms, Puerto Rico's electricity was already more expensive than any state's but Hawaii. Now, the government there is moving to sell off their troubled power utility, known as Crapo. On Friday, Governor Ricardo Rosselló reportedly said that he will work to keep rates down and that whoever buys Crapo will still have to answer to regulators who can cap the utility's rates. But just days earlier, the bill to privatize Crapo was changed to block regulators from capping future rate hikes. This makes Crapo a more attractive target for purchase. Now, whichever power company buys Crapo can make its money back quicker off the backs of its Puerto Rican customers. Crapo would also no longer have to answer for things like renewable energy. The road toward higher power rates for this devastated region is opening up even as it looks to sell off other assets, not just highways, but its schools too. All of it to pay off the massive $72 billion debt held by Wall Street hedge funds and mutual funds, almost half of it just interest. And if you ever doubted that old saying that being poor is expensive, consider that we learned last week that the first 5 months of Puerto Rico's bankruptcy case will cost $77 million in legal fees and expenses. The storms have been gone for months, and yet Puerto Rico is getting weaker, not stronger. They're rationing water and selling off resources, while some of the richest people in the world squeeze them daily for money, more money. And President Trump watches as an American paradise slips beneath the waves. In the space of 1 year, Puerto Rico has endured the biggest blackout in American history and the largest bankruptcy. The America I know not only forecasts storms, it helps storm victims recover. In Puerto Rico today, America is the storm. President Trump and Kim Jong-un, and what we need to know about diplomacy. That's straight ahead.
Do you trust the establishment media?
The United States economy has never been better. Monetary policy is spectacular.
Everybody thought Jamie Dimon was the king of Wall Street last week. Well, it might be Ken Lewis now. He takes the crown. The best sales force out there is Merrill Lynch, and now it goes to BofA. It's pretty amazing.
Pretty amazing. Lewis now. Buying opportunity.
I do think this is a buying opportunity. We're going to see a stabilization and just a tremendous snapback.
The rally will be jaw-dropping.
The Occupy Wall Street movement is not a spontaneous protest against economic inequality.
This is what we mean by the establishment press.
It is a well-thought-out campaign.
To bring down the infrastructure of this country.
The embarrassment is that I'm given credibility in this world because of the disappointment that the public has in what the news media does.
I'm the former chairman of the Veterans Committee, and I've learned a little bit about the cost of war. What the president is trying to do, and I agree with him, is to do everything that we can without going to war.
So what do you say to your critics? I'm talking about Democratic critics who say, you know what, he's really just a socialist pacifist.
I very rarely read in any coverage of Bernie that he's a socialist.
Bernie Sanders is a socialist, for God's sake.
Most analysts are saying that Hillary Clinton's going to win in a landslide.
I continue to believe Mr. Trump will not be president.
I've got Trump at 279, 259.
Wait a minute. No. I know you don't believe that. Sorry, we're not going to be polite anymore. You know what we're going to do? We're going to fight back.
Fight for a free and independent media. We're done with politeness. We fight back.
And finally, speaking with the enemy. Over the course of my career, I've seen few skills and human initiatives more important and more undervalued than statecraft. In the annals of our nation's history, we tend to celebrate generals more than secretaries of state. It's unfortunate because it has been the mixture of hard power and soft power that has led to many of our greatest foreign policy successes. Avoiding wars, keeping the peace, is almost always preferable to trying to win wars. These thoughts ring in my head once again with the developments over possible negotiations and indeed possibly a face-to-face summit between President Donald Trump and the head of the highly repressive, volatile, and isolated nation of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. It's not surprising that the rollout of this truly momentous policy shift was done haphazardly and amidst a great cloud of confusion, as such has been the standard operating procedure for this administration. We are left with many very serious questions. Will there be preconditions? Where will all this take place? What about the fact that our diplomatic corps has been hollowed out and dispirited under the Trump presidency? We don't even have an ambassador to South Korea. Is what we have seen from President Trump and his approach to serious policy concerns reason for grave concern about whether he will prepare himself for these negotiations? Are we raising Kim's stature and legitimizing his regime? These and many more questions continue to pour forth. It's okay to try to drastically shift a foreign policy dynamic. We saw that when President Nixon went to China. But as someone who was covering the White House at that time, I can assure you that was a highly prepared and strategic made affair. It was strategized from one end to the other. Nothing about the current impulse towards North Korea inspires the same confidence. Look, I know a lot of people are downright scared, afraid to think of President Trump meeting face-to-face with a dangerous enemy. I understand that. In some ways, it's justified. But that being said, I do remain a big believer in talking before shooting, if you can possibly do it. And while there's reason, plenty of reason for great skepticism, we also need to hold on to some hope, even if it's just an ember. Diplomacy didn't used to be as political, as partisan political as it's become. And I would gently suggest we need to return a sense of purpose and support to our diplomats. But President Trump has to be made to understand that you can't just wing this thing. The job of commander-in-chief is not just about rallies and retweets. It is hard work. And fewer things are more difficult and more serious than negotiations with an emergent nuclear power, especially one as cryptic and paranoid as North Korea. We need to lower tensions on the Korean Peninsula. We need reasons for optimism, but we also need a sober realism. We've already seen the White House walk back some of the recklessness of President Trump's initial rollout. That's a positive first step, but we need a lot more. This is too serious and too consequential to be driven by gut instinct, ego, and hubris. I hope that can sink in before we plunge into a course of folly. This is an opportunity, albeit a slim one, for some real progress, if we take it with the seriousness required. It's an open question whether President Trump can muster and sustain the kind of seriousness needed. It's up to us to demand it of him. With that, I'll leave you for this news cycle. The Young Turks is next, and we'll be back with the news at this same place and time, 5:30 Eastern, every Monday. Until then, Dan Rather reporting. Stay steady.